around the world. Today I spoke with 60-Minute journalist Ross Coulthart, who has been working on this case for some time.
We don't live in Australia, but would you say this is one of the largest scandals or one of the most well-known scandals in Australia?
It's kind of like Australia's Enron. It's huge. For the last 35 years, every journalist who has learned about this subject makes it their life's work to try and find Michael Hand and to try and solve this mystery. For us, it's a bit like finding out who killed JFK. It's a big mystery down here, and it's not every day you have a bank that turns out to have had such close associations with a major intelligence agency slap bang in the centre of your city. Sydney back then was a little bit like Idaho Falls is now. It was a fairly quiet place. We didn't know big-time criminals. We didn't know about the heroin trade, and I can remember as a young man it was a fairly naive town, and I think that's what Nugent Hand exploited. They came into this country and they basically played on the fact that our police force never expected a merchant bank with men wearing suits would be laundering the proceeds of drug trafficking and helping fund black operations for an intelligence agency on the other side of the world.
The Australian authorities and FBI really haven't pursued him. Why do you think that is?
Oh, I think the evidence is irrefutable that the American intelligence agencies did not want Michael Hand found. Michael Hand, by the way, is a highly decorated war hero. He's thought of very, very highly by a lot of the people that we've spoken to. He's a Green Beret. He was in one of the defining battles of the Vietnam War, Dong Xuai, where he won a Distinguished Service Cross, which is one below your Medal of Honor. You know, he's a very brave, very courageous man, and his service should be recognised. The problem is that he also had this role in covert operations. We've got documents that show that a year after he fled Australia in 1982, Michael Hand was in Honduras training almost certainly guerrillas who were going into Nicaragua to fight the Nicaraguan Sandinista rebels. And it's interesting because he was clearly working for the CIA during that period. And so a lot of the documents that we have obtained from our intelligence archives show that our intelligence services knew where he was, but they couldn't get cooperation from either the CIA, your FBI, or any of the intelligence services to track him down and bring him to justice, because essentially I think he was a protected species. The attitude was he was a Cold War warrior, he was a guy who did his bit to fight communism, and I think he's been allowed to have a quiet retirement in Idaho Falls, and God bless him.
So usually when someone would hide out, you would assume that they would maybe change their social security number. I know that he has the same social security number, and what are your thoughts on that? Well,
this is how we tracked him down. Michael Hand had changed his name to Michael Fuller, but what he hadn't done was change his social security number, and I don't think he realised that when he applied for citizenship in Australia, he had to provide his social security number to the Australian Immigration Service. And those records we obtained under Freedom of Information, and they gave us his social security number. And so when we started looking, when Peter Butt started looking, my colleague started looking for Michael Hand, he said, well, Michael Jon, that's J-O-N, Michael J-O-N Hand, he's probably changed his last name, but let's assume he's still got the first two names, and let's assume his wife's name is Helene. And so we were able to search the corporate records of every state in America digitally, online, by looking for Michael Jon, the two Christian names, and Helene. And the one place where we got a match was Idaho Falls, in the name of Michael Jon Fuller. And when we matched the signature for Michael, and the date of birth, and even better, the social security number, and the fingerprints, it proved definitively that this is Michael Hand, one of the most wanted fugitives in Australian history.
And that's also something I was going to ask you about. I spent all night trying to do some research on this and trying to figure it out. Nowhere except for when this story that you guys did aired did I see that he was, I saw obviously on Wikipedia and things like that talking about it, but I never saw that, you know, a list of where he was known as a most wanted fugitive. Is there somewhere that I could find that?
Look, you'd have to go back into the records of our equivalent of a grand jury. They're called royal commissions down here. And when Michael Hand fled Australia in the 1980s, there was a thing called a royal commission into drug trafficking. And that royal commission made recommendations in a secret report for a large number of people to be brought to justice. And one of them, I'm told by police who were on that investigation, was Michael Hand. And warrants were issued for Michael Hand's arrest. At the time, the warrants were only issued for fairly minor offences. He ordered, for example, all of the corporate records of Nugan Hand to be destroyed by staff. And for that, that's a very serious civil offence under corporations law. It's also a criminal offence here. He actually also threatened staff that if they didn't do what he told them to do, he would chop up their wives and children. So there was a very serious, violent threat made to the families of the staff members who I've spoken to, that if they didn't cooperate, they would be killed or their children and wives would be killed. The authorities issued arrest warrants both for that and also for him using a fake passport to flee Australia. But I suspect those warrants have now lapsed. I don't think there is still a current arrest warrant out for Michael Hand, and our police service is as sleepy as a lot of police services around the world. I think 35 years have passed and people are probably prepared to forgive and forget. If I was Michael Hand, I'd write a book. The guy is a war hero. He's an interesting guy. He was involved in a very interesting period of history where our intelligence services and the CIA were involved in a global battle against communism. And good on them. Damn right, we won. The problem was they broke a few eggs along the way. They had to smash a few yolks to cook an omelette. And the problem with that is those stories have never been told. And if I was Michael Hand, I'd relax. Nobody's going to come and kick his door in and drag him off to Australia. I don't think there's any chance at all of an extradition. I think that his friends in the CIA are going to look after him.
We're going to take a quick break, but when we return, more from the Skype interview with Ross and an official statement on behalf of John Michael Fuller given to us earlier today. Welcome back, everyone. Did 60 Minutes Australia make the trip to Idaho just to publicize Peter Butt's new book? And what will happen next?
And it's interesting because we've had quite a few calls from people who are based with your military in Idaho Falls. Apparently it's quite a large military base there, a government installation in Idaho Falls, and quite a few people have been sceptical that there is such a person as Michael Jon Fuller who served in the military, and they're saying that he's a crank and a fake. I can assure you, gentlemen, that Michael Jon Fuller is a decorated war hero. He's a Distinguished Service Cross winner in Vietnam, and his real name is Michael Jon Hand.
It was one of your dreams to confront him and hopefully speak with him. Obviously, you didn't speak with him, but you did confront him. Tell me about that dream moment and his reaction.
We were following Mr. Hand through Idaho Falls, and we knew he'd gone into a pharmacy, into a drugstore. And I walked up to him as he walked out of the drugstore, and he couldn't see my camera because my cameraman was behind me. But I think he began to realize, and you can see that look on his face. You can see the realization that the game is finally up. And dare I say, to read into my interpretation of what I saw, I think there was almost a sense of relief. He made the decision that he wasn't going to speak to me. I think he realised when I showed him that we had his fingerprints and that he had the same social security number, I think he realised that he'd made a very elementary mistake in spycraft. He'd got a little bit lazy. He'd assumed after 35 years that people had stopped looking for him. We've been looking to him for years, and really, quite frankly, in the end, the only thing that found him was Google.
Coming here to Idaho and confronting him, was there any part of this to promote Mr. Budge's book?
No, not at all. No, not at all. It's just a damn good story. I think you have to understand that Mr. Hand down here in Australia is a known corporate criminal fugitive. There were arrest warrants issued for his arrest. I've spoken to police who regard him as a major criminal who should be brought to justice. But a lot of time has passed, and I'm sceptical that their desires will actually translate into action. I think he can write his book and rest on his laurels and look after his good wife and enjoy his